United States, and I believe in much of the world, one of the secrets to achieving localization is, as we say, follow the money. And the way to follow the money is to look at where we put our money, or put our wealth, if you're afraid to talk about money. And I would argue that we need to start putting our money and our wealth into what we love in our own communities. Most of you are Australian, so let's give you a quick picture of the Australian economy. This picture here is of value added in 2006. Value added is another term for gross domestic product. And what it shows is that about 2/3 of the economy is generated by businesses with fewer than 200 employees. In other words, small or medium scale businesses. And frankly, even many of those larger enterprises are locally owned. This is employees. If you look at home-based businesses and the informal economy, like stay-at-home spouses, actually that global wedge gets really small. Maybe it's 20–25% of all of the value produced in our economy in Australia comes from global companies. And yet, I suspect you are putting a disproportionate percentage of your money in those companies. And to add sort of injury to insult is the fact that one reason you're doing this is because you believe you're getting huge profits by leaving money in conventional stock markets. And in point of fact, what we know in the United States is that sole proprietorships, which most small businesses either are or start out as, are 3 times as profitable as C corporations, with partnerships falling in between. Now is where we see your role. So by show of hands, how many people here have bought local something consciously over the past week? Okay, if you see anyone without a hand up, take them out at lunchtime and beat them up. How many of you do your banking at a local bank or credit union? Okay, few hands are down, we're going to work on you. Last question, those of you with superannuation funds, which should be almost all of you, how many of you have them in locally owned businesses? Okay, a few hands have gone up, you may or may not be correct, we'll go into that. This is outrageous! You are the biggest locavores in Australia, and you are systematically over-investing in the 3/4 of the economy that is global corporations, and under-investing, not putting any of your money into the local businesses we know are essential for community well-being. We gotta fix this problem. And what's even more outrageous about this is you've done it for nothing. So this is really a graph of rates of return on the Standard & Poor's in the United States. In other words, Wall Street. And if you have a loser social life as I do, you come back from a conference like this on Saturday to do your laundry and you listen to bad AM radio and you hear the investment advisor say, just leave your money in Wall Street, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and you will get 8, no 12, no 20% rate of return. These numbers are all made up. In fact, the historic rate of return, annual rate of return of Wall Street since 1879, adding in dividends, taking out inflation, is 2.6%. And your rate of return in Australia ain't any better. Here's the reason why we are in such a pickle. Because about 80 years ago, during the Great Depression, your country and mine created a system of securities law that we actually should call investment apartheid. And what investment apartheid means is that if you are in the top 1% of wealth, this guy, the accredited investor, you're allowed to put any money in anything, no questions asked. If you're in the other 99%, you can only put $1 into a local business, if you have had an attorney produce a thick document called a disclosure document, which is often written in 8-point font, all caps. No human being has ever been observed to read these documents. And as you read through, every page says, you will lose everything. You will lose everything. It's an empty ritual, which really is all designed as a welfare system for attorneys. And yet, this system stands in the way of local investment. If we were to fix this system in Australia, this would mean a $1 trillion shift. $1 trillion from global companies to local companies. And that works out to $50,000 per person in every community in Australia. So take the population of your town, multiply by 50,000, and that is the potential of new money going into local business if we get the securities law question right. How are we going to end the free ride Wall Street has gotten? And you know, in the United States, we're not required to put away money for our retirement for the most part, but many of us do. In your country, you are required to put away 9%, soon 13%, and the vast majority of the population doesn't understand that there's any alternatives to putting money into global companies. So by law, we are requiring Australians to subsidize globalization. We gotta fix this. In the United States, I decided to begin on a journey about 5-6 years ago on overhauling our securities law. Now, I went back to the first question that was raised in securities law. The whole reason we did this was to prevent grandma from buying swampland, to a bad deal in Florida. Bernie Madoff was our textbook character of the bad securities agent. What bothered me, though, was that grandma could go to any one of 1,000 casinos in North America. And when grandma walks into the casino, do they say, "Excuse me, grandma, but are you an accredited gambler?" No, that never happens. Or do we ask her, "Look, before you play blackjack, will you read this thick disclosure statement about the risks of blackjack and then sign that you understand it?" We don't do that. So we have two systems of risk management throughout the industrialized West. One system called gambling, where you can lose everything for nothing, and probably will, independent of income. And another system called investing in your local economy to create jobs, and we say, sorry, unless you pay off attorneys $50,000, $100,000 for a useless disclosure statement, you can't play. Something was very wrong with that system. So I wrote an article in the Federal Reserve's journal in 2009, mischievously suggesting a $100 exemption. Any person could put $100 into any local business, no questions asked, no legal paperwork. To me, $100 is no more risky than a Chinese dinner for two at a new restaurant. And yet we don't require the Chinese restaurant to do $100,000 of disclosure work before they open their doors. Well, what did the SEC do with this? They didn't do anything, and then some friends of mine wrote a rulemaking petition. Hundreds of people wrote letters in support of this. And then what did the Securities and Exchange Commission do? Nothing. 2 years later, 2011, they were brought before the Republican-run Government Operations Committee. The chair of the SEC, Mary Shapiro, was asked, whatever became of that $100 exemption? And she kind of twisted in her seat uncomfortably and said, well, we get these ridiculous proposals for reform all the time, and maybe we'll form a committee in a few months. The committee went ballistic. U.S. unemployment at that point was 9%. This was a no-brainer proposal to bring money into the only businesses we know that can create jobs. and she was just saying, we're going to foist it off on a committee in a few years. This congressional committee voted unanimously, and I mean Tea Party Republicans and Occupy Democrats. They voted unanimously, not for a $100 exemption, but for a $10,000 exemption. Well, this went to the Senate. It was debated a few months, and this guy, some of you recognize him, said, get it done. It got whittled back to $2,000, but the result is that now any American, independent of income, can put at least $2,000 per company per year into local business with very little legal paperwork. We legalize local investment. And I want to emphasize that, I have spent my entire life working on loser causes, right? Every conceivable losing cause has been part of my job. So to me, to be part of something that actually wins was disorienting. And it's a reminder that if we take ourselves seriously, this can and should happen in Australia. This is my second trip here in 4 months talking about this around the country. You are primed for this kind of overhaul of your security system as well. And the key is to build partnerships left, right, and center, all of whom understand that these old laws need to go away. I believe we are on the precipice of a huge investment revolution. The shift that ought to happen in the United States is not $1 trillion. It's $15 trillion. And I try to imagine what will happen when the first $1 trillion moves from Wall Street to Main Street. Well, as the demand for Wall Street securities goes down, their prices begin to drop. And as the demand for local securities goes up, their prices get better. And investment advisors say, my God, there's something to this localization thing. You maybe should start putting your smart money into these local businesses. So then the next trillion moves, and another, and another. This could happen very quickly. This could be the most significant shift of capital in human history. And if we accomplish this, localization will not be just a dream, but it will be the new global order that we own. Thank you very much.